The grand hall of the Vosh Palace on Lyris 9 gleamed like a sea of silver under the twin suns. Walls of shifting metal and light reflected the colors of the sky outside, moving and shimmering in patterns that no human mind could fully predict. Commander Elias Hart stepped carefully across the polished floor, adjusting to the subtle hum of the palace. Every step seemed alive with energy, as though the building itself was aware of him. He was nervous. Not because of the wedding, not because of the political spotlight, and certainly not because of the centuries-old traditions of the Vosh people. He was nervous because he had just learned a truth that made his heart sink. He had married Ambassador Sela Vosh that morning in a ceremony broadcast across 3 star systems. The marriage was a strategic alliance, designed to strengthen ties between humanity and the Vosh consortium. Sela had been poised, graceful, and radiant, every movement choreographed with the elegance of her people. Elias had tried to match her calm, but inside his thoughts were spinning. It wasn't the ceremony itself that troubled him. It was the law. An obscure clause buried in the consortium's ancient legal texts had suddenly been brought to his attention. By marrying Sela, he was also legally bound to her sisters. Not just as acquaintances or friends, but as spouses. He had read the translation several times, hoping to find a mistake. Marriage to a househead invokes the sister bond clause. All house sisters are included as spouses. The words glowed on the crystal screen before him. "Are you sure that is correct?" he asked Mara, Sela's eldest sister, who stood beside him. She was calm as always, her silver hair pulled back in a braid. Mara nodded. "The translation is accurate. But sisters in the text does not always mean blood relations. Some are adopted, some are chosen by the house. Some are even artificial persons with full legal status. The clause applies to all of them." Elias ran a hand through his hair. "So, this isn't just Sela. It's everyone in her household labeled as a sister." "And it is automatic?" "Yes," Mara said quietly. "The law is absolute. Once one becomes a spouse of a househead, all sisters gain legal spouse status." He felt a knot in his stomach. On Earth, marriage was a personal promise between 2 people. Here, it was a network contract. A single signature bound an entire household. Sela approached him, her steps silent on the reflective floor. Her expression was calm, but her eyes held a flicker of concern. "Elias, the law's old, yes, but it exists for a reason. Houses once faced total collapse in ancient wars. The clause was meant to protect the household and maintain unity. It was not intended to cause confusion or fear." Elias looked into her eyes. She spoke gently, but he could see the weight of expectation behind her words. She had grown up with this law. It was part of her world. For him, it was a storm he had not anticipated. "I understand that," he said slowly. "But this is different for humans. Choice matters to us. Consent matters. If I am bound to everyone automatically, that isn't choice. It is obligation." Sela reached for his hand. "I know, and you will not be alone in understanding it. The sisters are not strangers. They will guide you. Trust them as I trust you." Mara stepped forward again. "We are curious about you, Elias. Your people have always done things differently. Humans value honesty and directness, and your thinking may help us see old laws in a new light. But you must act carefully. The court, the public, and even the household watch every move." Elias swallowed hard. The weight of responsibility pressed down. He was not just a husband. He was a symbol, a test case, a bridge between humans and an alien legal system. His decisions could affect alliances, reputation, and peace between species. The sisters moved through the palace in fluid steps, each displaying a distinct personality. Mara, the pragmatic engineer, approached every situation with calm logic. Quen, a scholar poet, saw patterns and meaning in words and history. Others, quieter, measured Elias with subtle glances, weighing his character and intentions. Elias was determined to respect all of them, but understanding an alien culture, obeying an ancient law, and maintaining personal ethics, all at once, felt like walking a razor's edge. That evening, the palace gardens offered a brief reprieve. Silver trees glowed faintly, their leaves moving with the rhythm of the air. Sela walked beside Elias, her presence reassuring. "You don't have to understand everything all at once," she said softly, "but you must be aware. You cannot ignore the law and you cannot ignore choice." Elias nodded. "I will do my best. But I need to know. Do the sisters have any say in this?" Mara answered from a nearby path. They always have choice. The law recognizes their rights even if it assumes inclusion. Consent can still be expressed, formally or informally. You must learn to see the difference between obligation and agreement. The idea offered a small comfort. Perhaps there was a way to navigate the law without breaking ethics. Perhaps the network of bonds could be transformed into something voluntary. The palace halls that night were quiet, yet alive with the whisper of centuries-old traditions. Elias walked through them, thinking of the task ahead. He had to learn the customs, the language, the subtleties of law. He had to gain trust, not just from Sela but from her sisters and the broader public. His mind returned to Earth, to the straightforward contracts and clear promises he had known. Humans solved problems by speaking plainly, by combining logic with morality. Perhaps that approach could work here as well. Perhaps clarity, honesty, and courage could build bridges where centuries of law had built walls. The next morning, the palace council met. Delegates from various worlds had arrived to witness the formalization of the bond. Cameras floated in the air, capturing every gesture. Elias was the focus of attention, though Sela remained the center of ceremony. A senior Vosh counselor spoke first. The sister bond clause exists. It is ancient. It ensures the protection of the household. Commander Hart by law is bound not only to Sela, but to all sisters of the household. This is the text of law. The council requires formal acknowledgement. Elias inhaled deeply. He had expected this. His role was not ceremonial. It was participatory. He would have to navigate the expectations, the traditions, and the politics, all without violating his own principles. Sela placed her hand lightly on his arm. Remember what we discussed. Trust and honesty. Do not act out of fear. You are not alone. He nodded, feeling the weight of her confidence. It gave him strength. Over the next days, Elias studied Vosh law, history, and culture with the sisters. Mara explained engineering projects and societal logistics, demonstrating how houses had survived disasters and wars. Quen shared poetry and stories, teaching him about symbolism, loyalty, and ethical decision-making. The quieter sisters observed, asking questions, offering insights, and assessing his character. Elias learned quickly. He saw that the law was not a weapon but a tool, one that had been misinterpreted over centuries. The clause had intended to protect, not coerce. He began to plan how to navigate the coming challenges, the court, the public perception, and the ceremonial rituals required to formalize the bonds. At night, he stood on the palace balcony, looking out at the glowing city of Lyris 9, the twin moons reflected in the towers, casting silver light across the gardens. He felt the enormity of his role, yet also a strange sense of calm. Humans had faced challenges before. Unknown worlds, unknown laws, unknown cultures, and had survived by adapting, learning, and acting with courage. He realized that this was another challenge of the same kind. Not one of war or conquest, but of understanding, trust, and ingenuity. The law might seem impossible, but human qualities, honesty, courage, and clarity could turn it from a chain into a bridge. Elias turned to the palace gardens once more, where Sela and the sisters walked among glowing flowers. They were not just part of the law, they were individuals with opinions, intelligence, and agency. His task was to respect that while navigating the complex web of tradition. And so, the first day of his new life ended with both awe and apprehension. A human in an alien world bound by ancient law, surrounded by individuals who could be allies or challengers, Elias understood one truth. The journey ahead would not be simple, but it would be meaningful. For the first time, he felt ready to face it. Commander Elias Hart sat in the wide chamber of the Vosh house, surrounded by silver walls that shifted their color with the rhythm of the day. The palace on Lyris 9 did not look like any home on Earth. The walls breathed faint light, the floors moved slightly beneath his steps, and every object seemed alive with a purpose. He had spent weeks in this strange home, but each morning still felt like his first. Elias was a man of discipline, raised in the Order of Earth's Fleet Academy, where lines were straight and rules were clear. Here nothing was straight and no rule was ever spoken in a single line. Vosh culture loved layers, double meanings, and traditions that stretched back thousands of years. And now, through one ancient clause of consortium law, Elias had become part of it. The wedding with Ambassador Sela Vosh had been public, bright, and celebrated across 3 star systems. It was meant as a symbol, human and Vosh united, standing together in peace. But what followed was a storm Elias had never expected. The law stated that by marrying Sela, he had also entered a bond with the entire household of her sisters. On Earth, marriage was a private promise. Here, it was a contract of networks, binding not only people but whole families, estates, and histories. Elias did not resist the alliance. He respected Sela. She was strong, intelligent, and graceful in the way she balanced politics with kindness. But the idea that he was now bound to her sisters confused him. Were they truly sisters? Some were related by blood, but others were not. Mara was an engineer, born from a genetic line adopted into the family. Quen was a scholar poet, chosen years ago by the house to preserve its memory. There were others too, some quiet, some outspoken. All were considered part of the household and thus by law bound to him. The galaxy, of course, noticed. News programs repeated the story daily. Commentators argued whether Elias was trapped, blessed, or both. Some saw it as proof of human weakness, others as a dangerous precedent. He had become a living test case, not by choice but by circumstance. Inside the Vosh palace, the mood was no less complicated. Sela remained steady, but Elias saw worry in her eyes whenever she looked at him. She had grown up with these laws. She understood their weight. She also knew how different they felt to a human, who valued private choice more than ritual. The sisters themselves were divided. Mara treated Elias with open curiosity, asking about human ships, tools, and technology. Quen approached him with poetic questions, wondering how humans told stories of love and loyalty. Others kept their distance, unsure whether to accept him or keep him at arm's length. One evening, Elias joined Mara in the workshop beneath the palace. The room was filled with humming machines, tools shaped like animals, and glowing diagrams projected on the air. Mara worked with steady hands, her silver hair tied back as she welded pieces of a broken drone. "You humans," Mara said without looking up, "make everything simple. A contract means one thing. A promise means one thing. You hold them like stones. But here, nothing is a stone. Everything flows." Elias folded his arms. "On Earth, we need clarity. If you say one thing and mean another, trust breaks." She smiled faintly. "Trust here means flexibility. We believe strength is shown in how you adapt to many meanings, not how you hold to one." He thought about that long after leaving her workshop. The truth was, he respected her logic, but he also felt lost in it. Quen was different. She invited Elias to her library, where shelves curved like rivers and each book was a living crystal that whispered its words aloud. She asked him about Earth's tales, epics of sailors, explorers, and families. He told her about Odysseus, about ships crossing oceans under stars. She listened with shining eyes, then answered with poems of her own people, verses about houses bound by oath and law. "You see," Quen said softly, "our law is not about possession, it is about survival. Long ago, when our worlds burned in wars, whole households had to stay together or die. Marriage was not private love. It was shield and structure. Without binding, there was collapse." Elias nodded. He began to see the reason behind the law. Still, his human heart struggled. Consent, choice, freedom. These were more than words to him. They were values he could not give up. Outside the palace, the political struggle grew sharper. A human rights group on Earth declared that Elias was being forced into relationships he did not choose. Vosh hardliners argued that humans were too naive to understand interstellar law. News feeds showed protests, debates, and endless commentary. One morning, Sela entered his chamber with heavy steps. Her silver robe shimmered with dim light. "The council has spoken," she said. "They expect a formal ritual of bond confirmation. It will include not only me but the sisters as well." Elias stood still. His chest tightened. "And if I refuse?" "Then our marriage is broken. The alliance ends, and peace between our peoples may collapse." The words hung in the air like heavy chains. Elias stared at the shifting walls, feeling the weight of 2 worlds on his shoulders. He had not chosen this law, but he could not escape it either. Later that day, Mara found him on the balcony, gazing at the glowing city below. "You think too much," she teased, but her voice carried sympathy. Elias looked at her. "How do I do this? How do I stand in a ritual that says I am bound to all of you when I don't even know what that means?" She shrugged. "Perhaps you stop thinking of it as binding and think of it as opening. No chain, only a bridge. You do not have to walk across it if you do not wish, but you must not burn it either." Her words eased him a little. A bridge, not a chain. Maybe that was how he could face this. Still, the coming ritual loomed. He lay awake at night, listening to the palace breathe, wondering how much of himself he could give without losing who he was. By the end of part 2, Elias understood more of the Vosh culture, but felt the weight of expectation growing heavier. He saw both the beauty and the danger of their laws. He began to win the trust of Mara and Quen, yet he knew the true test lay ahead. The ritual, the court, and the choice that could change not only his life, but the bond between two civilizations. The great hall of the Galactic court shimmered with silver columns that rose into mist. Stars glowed faintly on the ceiling as if the judges sat beneath a living sky. Commander Elias Hart walked through the wide doors with a heavy step. He was not dressed in his fleet uniform, but in a plain gray robe that marked him as a witness. Even so, his human posture, straight, steady, unflinching, drew every eye in the chamber. For weeks the debate had grown louder. Commentators across the consortium had argued about his marriage to Sela Vosh and the ancient law that bound him to her sisters. Some voices demanded the law be enforced strictly, as it had been for centuries. Others cried for reform, pointing out that humans had never agreed to such terms. The case had now reached the highest level of judgment, and Elias had been summoned to testify. Sela stood beside him, tall and graceful, her silver robe flowing with light. Mara and Quen followed, each carrying scrolls of glowing data. Behind them, the court chamber filled with delegates, scholars, and reporters. The whole galaxy seemed to watch this moment. When the judges entered, tall beings of many species robed in deep blue, silence fell. Their leader, a serene figure with eyes like molten gold, spoke first. This court meets to decide the meaning of House Law 317, known as the Sister Bond Clause. The question is simple. Does the marriage of Elias Hart to Sela Vosh bind him to her sisters as spouses without their consent? Or is consent required? The words echoed across the chamber. Simple words, but the weight behind them was immense. Elias listened as legal scholars from the Vosh consortium presented their case. They argued that the clause had stood for millennia, protecting households from being broken apart. They spoke of survival in ancient wars, of how binding entire families together created unity and strength. Without such law, one scholar declared, houses would collapse in times of crisis. Tradition is survival. The human delegation rose next. Dr. Imani Park, a legal scholar from Earth, spoke with calm but firm voice. Tradition has value, she said, but no tradition should erase consent. The clause may have been designed for protection, but today it is being used as control. No person, human or Vosh, should be forced into a bond they did not choose. Elias felt pride as he listened to her. Humans did not have the experience of centuries in galactic law, but they had clarity, directness, and moral conviction. When it was Elias's turn to speak, he stepped forward to the center platform. His voice carried across the hall. I came here not to break your traditions, he began, but to honor them. I respect Sela, her sisters, and her people, but I am human. On Earth, a promise is sacred because it is chosen freely. If a law removes choice, then it is not a bond, it is a chain. And I will not chain anyone, not myself and not the sisters of this house. The hall stirred with whispers. Some delegates nodded, others frowned. At that moment, Quen stepped forward. She carried a glowing crystal, a record from the house archives. Her soft voice filled the silence. The clause we speak of was written after the burning wars when whole households faced destruction. It was meant to keep families together when parents and leaders died. It was not meant to erase the will of the living. It was meant to protect them. The crystal projected images, old battles, burned cities, broken families. It showed how the law was once a shield, not a weapon. Many in the chamber looked startled. They had never seen the original context. Mara spoke next, her voice firm. The law was practical in its time, but times have changed. Our people are not in burning ruins. We are in a council of many worlds. If law is to remain alive, it must adapt. A house is strongest not when forced, but when chosen. The evidence shook the chamber. Reporters whispered into their recorders. Delegates leaned forward. The judges looked thoughtful, but not everyone agreed. A delegate from a rival faction rose angrily. If we change this law, we risk breaking the fabric of every house across the consortium. If consent becomes optional, houses will fracture. Alliances will crumble. This is not about one human marriage. It is about the survival of our entire system, Elias answered calmly. Survival is not the same as fear. Humans survived by adapting, by creating new rules when the old ones failed. When we sailed the seas, we rewrote codes. When we reached the stars, we built new treaties. Survival without dignity is not survival at all. It is slow death. His words carried quiet strength. They were not poetic like Quen's, not technical like Mara's, but they were direct, human, and clear. The court recessed for review. During the pause, Elias sat with Sela, Mara, and Quen in a small chamber behind the hall. The air was heavy. "They will not decide easily," Sela whispered. "There are powers here who fear change more than injustice." Elias rubbed his forehead. "Then we must give them no room to hide. We must find more proof, something undeniable." That night, Mara worked through thousands of old records. Quen searched through poems and songs of the burning wars. And Elias spoke with Dr. Imani Park about human legal strategies. Together they discovered something hidden deep in the codices, a forgotten clause. The text was old and faded, written in ancient script. But when translated, its meaning was clear. The sister bond clause required annual reaffirmation. The original law had not been permanent at all. Each year, members of the household were to gather and renew their consent. Without this renewal, the bond dissolved. It was a loophole. No, more than a loophole. It was the original truth. The law had been misused for centuries, its intent twisted until people forgot the requirement of consent. The next day, Elias and his companions presented the discovery to the court. Quen read the old script aloud, her voice trembling with emotion. Mara showed the technical seal proving the document's authenticity. "This," Elias declared, holding the glowing scroll high, "is the heart of the law, not chains but choices renewed each year." The clause was never about forced bonds. It was about protection and voluntary unity. The hall erupted. Delegates shouted. Reporters hurried to broadcast the news. The judges struck their staffs against the floor for silence. The lead judge spoke slowly. "This court cannot ignore such evidence. We will deliberate further. Until then, all enforcement of the clause is suspended." Relief washed over Elias, though he knew the battle was not finished. The final ruling had not yet come, but hope flickered bright. Outside, crowds cheered. Many had feared that the case would end in silence or compromise, but instead, it had unearthed a truth hidden for centuries. Humans, with their stubborn honesty and refusal to bend under pressure, had helped reveal it. Yet as Elias returned to the Vosh Palace that evening, Sela placed a hand on his arm. Her voice was quiet. "Do not rest yet. Those who fear change will not sit idle. They may try to silence us, or erase the proof we found." Her warning echoed in his mind as he looked out across the shining city of Lyris 9. The legal war was not over. The next challenge would not be in words, but in survival. The sun of Lyris 9 was just rising, casting golden streaks across the city of silver towers. Commander Elias Hart stood on the balcony of the Vosh Palace, staring down at the bustling streets below. Peace had seemed within reach after the court accepted the evidence of the sister bond clause's original intent. Yet a shadow of unease lingered. That morning, a message arrived from the Galactic Court's registry. The records containing the historical documents had been corrupted. A sudden system failure had scrambled centuries of archives. Without them, the evidence Elias and his team had uncovered could vanish forever. The law and their carefully built case would be lost. Sela's face tightened. "Someone is trying to erase history," she said quietly. Her calm voice hid a storm of concern. "If they succeed, the court may rule against us. Our proof will be gone and the old interpretation will return." Elias clenched his fists. "Then we go to the source. We cannot rely on what could be deleted. We have to rebuild it ourselves." Mara stepped forward, determination lighting her face. "The backup records are stored on the Ardent Research Outpost, orbiting the gas giant Vera. It is a 2-day flight, and the security system is extremely complex. But if we can get there, we can restore everything." Elias nodded. "Then we leave at once." By midday, a small team of humans and Vosh sisters boarded the starcraft Celestia, a sleek ship designed for both speed and stealth. Mara and Elias worked together in the cockpit, repairing minor malfunctions caused by the ship's long idling. Quen monitored communication channels, scanning for any signs that the attackers might follow them. The journey through space was tense. Stars streaked past in long lines as the ship entered warp. Elias could feel the weight of responsibility pressing on him. The court's ruling, the alliance between humans and the Vosh consortium, and even the safety of the sisters all depended on this mission. Yet he felt a quiet confidence rooted in something human. The ability to improvise, adapt, and face unexpected challenges. On the second day, the Ardent Research Outpost appeared in the viewing screen, orbiting the gas giant with a brilliant blue atmosphere. The outpost was old, its walls pitted and weathered. Security drones patrolled the perimeter. Mara's fingers flew over the console. We need to bypass the external locks. The drones will recognize any standard entry code as invalid. They will trigger self-defense. Elias leaned over, watching her work. What's the plan? Mara smiled faintly. We make the system think we are authorized maintenance bots. I can reprogram the drones temporarily. Then we enter undetected. Quen frowned. And if something goes wrong? Then we improvise, Elias said simply. That is human ingenuity. Together they executed the plan. Mara's skill with machines was precise, and Quen's knowledge of old systems guided them through security protocols. Elias assisted with quick, decisive movements, clearing errors, resetting circuits, and manually overriding faulty code. Slowly the doors to the archive wing opened. Inside, the outpost was dark and cold. Holographic screens flickered on the walls, displaying centuries of records and streams of glowing data. Elias and Mara quickly located the files containing the Sister Bond Clause's original documents. Quen assisted, translating the ancient language and confirming the authenticity of each scroll. But the mission was not without danger. A sudden alarm blared, and drones appeared from hidden compartments. They scanned the room with sharp lights, moving fast. Mara swore under her breath. Elias acted without hesitation. He grabbed a maintenance panel and opened it, revealing a tangle of wires. With Mara's guidance, he rerouted the sensors, temporarily disabling the drones. The machines buzzed angrily but did not attack. Quen looked at him in awe. You think like a Vosh engineer, but with speed humans have. That was brilliant. Elias shrugged, a small smile on his face. We do what we must. Within hours, they had copied all the necessary data. Every scroll, hologram, and recording was secured on the Celestia. Yet as they prepared to leave, a shadow appeared on the monitors, a small fleet of ships approaching fast. Attackers had traced their route. Evasive maneuvers, Elias shouted. He grabbed the controls, dodging through asteroid debris and energy storms. Mara recalibrated the shields, holding the ship steady. Quen guided them through a series of jumps that bent the attackers' sensors. Humanity's ingenuity, combined with Vosh expertise, allowed them to escape what seemed an impossible trap. By the time they returned to Lyris 9, the city was bathed in twilight. The team had survived and the evidence was safe. More importantly, the sisters had worked alongside Elias not as subjects of law, but as active participants, demonstrating their skills, knowledge, and courage. In this, Elias saw the truth of the bridge Mara had spoken of. Mutual respect, trust, and shared purpose could accomplish what force never could. In the days that followed, the court reviewed the restored data. Judges and delegates were astonished by the speed and ingenuity of the retrieval. Every detail of the original law was verified. The loophole, the annual reaffirmation of consent, one was clearly documented. Misuse of the clause by power brokers in the past became obvious. During a tense hearing, Elias, Mara, and Quen presented their findings. Mara spoke of technical details, how the law's intent had been misapplied. Quen read excerpts from historical texts and poetry, illustrating the original meaning of protection and choice. Elias summarized the human perspective: clarity, consent, and moral courage. The chamber was silent after their testimony. The judges whispered among themselves, eyes scanning the records. Even those opposed to reform could not deny the weight of evidence and the ingenuity displayed by humans and Vosh working together. Outside the court, news channels broadcast live footage of the mission. Across the galaxy, millions watched a human and Vosh sisters recover ancient records under threat of attack. The story became a symbol. Humans were not just strong in battle, but clever, resourceful, and morally steadfast. Humanity's reputation grew not through dominance, but through courage, creativity, and ethical action. At night, Elias returned to the Vosh Palace. The city of Lyris 9 glimmered beneath him, its silver towers reflecting the stars. Selah joined him on the balcony, her expression a mix of pride and relief. "You did more than save records," she said softly. "You proved something about humans." Elias smiled. "I didn't do it alone. Mara, Quen, all of us together. We adapted, we faced the challenge, and we respected each other. That is what humans do best. We solve problems, even impossible ones." Selah nodded. "The court will decide soon. Whatever happens, you have earned trust here. That is more important than law alone." Elias looked out at the stars, feeling the weight of responsibility lifting slightly. He had faced crises, threats, and the unknown. Yet through it all, he had relied on human qualities: ingenuity, courage, and a refusal to compromise his ethics. The sisters gathered around later that evening. They spoke quietly, not of law but of plans, how to use their recovered records to educate others, how to prevent misuse in the future, how to strengthen their household without removing freedom. Elias listened and contributed ideas. Together they planned a path forward. Mara clapped her hands, smiling. "Humans are stubborn," she said. "But stubbornness can be very useful." Quen laughed softly. "And sometimes it saves the galaxy." Elias chuckled. "Then we are already doing our job." For the first time since the ordeal began, Elias felt a sense of calm. The immediate crisis was over. The evidence was safe. The sisters trusted him and he trusted them. Yet he knew the court's final ruling would be the ultimate test. Would the law finally respect choice and consent, or would centuries of tradition push it back to rigid control? As night fell over Lyris 9, Elias realized something else. Human ingenuity was not only in machines and tools, but in courage, clarity, and integrity. He had learned that alliances could be built not by force but by example. And in this he saw a spark of hope, not just for himself but for the galaxy. The Galactic Court was alive with tension. Delegates, scholars, and citizens from countless star systems had gathered to witness the final decision. Holographic screens broadcast the hearing across the galaxy, showing millions that the moment would not only affect Elias Hart and the Vosh household, but set a precedent for generations to come. Elias stood at the front of the hall, flanked by Selah Vosh, Mara, and Quen. They were no longer just a household. They had become a symbol, humans and Vosh united by trust, courage, and respect. Each of them carried the calm confidence that comes from surviving trials together. The lead judge, a tall, golden-eyed being named Sorel, began the session. "We have received all evidence, including testimony, historical records, and the recent mission to the Ardent Research Outpost. This court must now decide the interpretation of House Law 317, the Sister Bond Clause, and its application in modern society." Murmurs swept through the chamber. Elias felt a flutter of nerves, though he stood straight, his hands clasped calmly. On Earth, he would have prepared speeches, charts, and clear arguments. Here he had relied on a combination of truth, courage, and ingenuity, qualities humans valued most. Sorel continued. "This court recognizes that the clause, as originally intended, required annual reaffirmation and respected consent. Historical misuse has created confusion and hardship, particularly for those outside the House. This court acknowledges the evidence brought forth by Commander Hart and his companions." A pause. Delegates leaned forward. The golden eyes of Sorel scanned the chamber. "Therefore, this court rules. Automatic binding of spouses through the Sister Bond Clause is null. Consent and reaffirmation are required for all household members. Any marriage or bond enacted without choice is invalid under interstellar law." The hall erupted in whispers, then cheers, as news channels flashed updates. Elias exhaled slowly, feeling a wave of relief and quiet pride. Years of human persistence, courage, and clarity had helped reshape an ancient law. Selah reached out and took his hand. Her touch was light but strong, and Elias felt a connection beyond law or ritual, a bond of trust and respect. Mara and Quen stood nearby, smiling with relief. They had been part of this journey, and the victory belonged to all of them. The court invited Selah and the sisters to speak. One by one they stepped forward, their voices steady but filled with meaning. Selah spoke first. "This law was once meant to protect households. Today, we affirm it should protect choice as well. No tradition, no clause is stronger than the will of the living. We choose to honor the past but with freedom." Mara followed. "As members of this household, we recognize our autonomy. We do not need a law to tell us who to respect or love. We will act with consent, trust, and mutual support. That is the strength of a household. Quen's words were soft but clear. Humans taught us something important: clarity and courage. It is not force that unites a house, but understanding. We choose to bind ourselves together through trust, not law alone. Finally, Elias spoke. I came here not to impose human ways, but to understand and respect yours. Together we discovered that consent and choice make bonds stronger, not weaker. Tradition without understanding is fragile. Understanding without courage is meaningless. Today we take the first step toward a better future, together. The chamber was silent. Even those who had opposed the reform found themselves moved by these words. It was not a speech of dominance or confrontation. It was a statement of principle. Outside the court, citizens celebrated. Holographic screens showed the news. Humans and Vosh working together had not only preserved an ancient law but transformed it for a modern, fair galaxy. Children cheered in the streets of multiple worlds. Scholars debated the new precedent in quiet corners, and families, both human and Vosh, learned that law could evolve without erasing tradition. Back at the Vosh Palace, the household gathered for a quiet moment. The tension of the past weeks had eased, replaced by a sense of shared achievement. They walked through the gardens, glowing softly in the light of Lyris IX's twin moons. Sela spoke first, smiling. You have changed more than law. You have changed how we see ourselves. I am proud to stand with you. Mara chuckled softly. I never thought a human could teach a Vosh engineer about patience, courage, and clarity at the same time. Yet here we are, Quen added. It was not just one human. It was all of you working together. That is the lesson. Trust and collaboration are stronger than any law written on scrolls. Elias smiled. We learned it together. And I think that is what makes a family, a household, and even a galaxy strong. That night they stood together on the balcony looking at the stars. Each one reflected on the journey. The initial shock of law, the complex cultural differences, the courtroom battles, and the dangerous mission to recover the archives. They had faced crises that tested skill, judgment, and morality. And through it all, they had not just survived, they had shaped a better path. For Elias, it was a personal revelation. Humans were not always the strongest in raw power, but they were clever, adaptive, and principled. Their ingenuity lay not in domination, but in courage, problem-solving, and moral clarity. It was this combination that allowed him to navigate a law he did not understand, survive a high-stakes mission, and gain the trust of beings whose culture was millennia old. The sisters now saw him differently. He was no longer merely a participant in their law. He was a partner, a friend, and a symbol of mutual respect. He had not forced bonds. He had helped them find their own. And in doing so, he had upheld the best of human values. In the days that followed, the household prepared to formalize their relationships, not as a matter of law, but as a matter of choice. Sela, Mara, Quen, and Elias drew up a household charter, outlining responsibilities, mutual respect, and reaffirmation of consent. They planned for shared projects, aiding worlds recovering from disaster, strengthening trade and education, and fostering alliances. For the first time, the household of Sela Vosh was united not by obligation, but by voluntary commitment and trust. The ceremony to formalize their household was celebrated, not as a binding law, but as a declaration of choice. The galaxy watched, inspired by this act of collaboration and principle. Elias reflected on the journey. He had arrived expecting to fulfill a role as a cultural ambassador, to obey rules and follow protocol. Instead, he had faced unexpected law, cultural shock, and danger. He had discovered that the human way, clear thinking, moral courage, and clever problem-solving, could reshape even the oldest, most rigid traditions, and more importantly, he had seen that these qualities could be shared across species, across cultures, and across centuries-old boundaries. Humanity's strength lay not in force but in ingenuity, ethics, and the courage to act rightly when faced with uncertainty. On the final evening, Elias, Sela, Mara, and Quen stood together, looking toward the horizon where the twin moons reflected in the city's silver towers. They laughed, talked, and planned their next steps. The law had been transformed, trust had been forged, and a new precedent had been set. For Elias, the lesson was clear. Courage, clarity, and respect could change the galaxy. Not by conquest, but by example. Humanity had arrived not as masters but as partners, and in that partnership, both humans and Vosh had found a stronger, fairer way forward. The stars above seemed to shine a little brighter, as if acknowledging the new path of collaboration, choice, and trust that had been carved across worlds. And so, the story of a human caught in ancient law, a family bound by tradition, and the courage to act with wisdom and clarity came to a close. A story of partnership, respect, and the power of human ingenuity to guide not just one household, but a galaxy toward a brighter future.